and welcome to our overview of Math 3 Unit 7 Conics. We're going to begin this overview by looking at the curriculum guide and seeing what is in that. If you ever want to get to the curriculum guide, remember that it is posted on our Google Docs page for you to refer to. And I'm excited to have you look at this. I'm starting with this because our Common Core California State Standards have created a very different view of how we look at conics and why we look at conics as a topic that we are teaching. And so our teaching needs to be significantly different from what it was before as we introduced conics. So let me just show you the essential questions we're really trying to get at as we look at a few of the conic shapes that we've traditionally taught in the Algebra 2 curriculum. Our two essential questions are, how does a written definition of a shape relate to its algebraic expression? This is really important. As we look at the standards, you'll see why. And number two, why are certain arrangements of formulas preferred for circles and parabolas in particular? The standard in general talks about rearranging formulas to show certain aspects about a function or a shape. And so we're going to be looking at those two things. We're going to look at mathematical expressions based upon written definitions are manipulated algebraically to make the standard forms, and also they can be transformed to forms that easily provide the reader with the most possible information about the shape. And if you pull this up, you'll see a nice quick description of the unit right here in the unit description. A couple things that I think Algebra 2 teachers would be surprised by is to see that we are not going to be discussing ellipses and hyperbolas. You Math 3 honors teachers, those will still be included in your curriculum. That is a plus standard. But we really want to focus on these ideas. Our goal is not to just get 1,000 formulas for different shapes memorized into students' heads, but really to understand the thinking part of how taking something in writing can be changed to an equation, and how if we rearrange that equation we'll be able to see interesting parts about those shapes. And so that's what we're focused on. We don't need 4 shapes to be able to do that. In advanced math they'll get those other 2 shapes for the few times they might want to use those in calculus, but right now we're going to be focusing on just parabolas and circles. And I want to show you the standards. The next part is standards. It goes on to the next page, and so really all of the standards fit onto the second page here. Let me just pull that up. This is page 2 of our curriculum guide. And page 2, let me get it underneath from there so this shows up a little better. There we go. Hopefully that light will change. Page 2, you can see that interpreting the expressions is one thing, and using the structure of the expression as a way to rewrite it. We're going to be rewriting things by completing the square in this particular and rearranging the equations to get from form to form. We're going to do a little bit of reviewing our shifting because we did learn that before, but because we're not going to be necessarily talking about functions only, because we'll have sideways parabolas, sometimes we need to be careful about the rules that students have memorized. They won't work exactly the same for a function in y. We're going to be able to, looking down here in geometry, derive the equation of a circle given its center and radius using Pythagorean theorem. Complete the square to find the center and the radius of the circle given by an equation. We're also going to be able to derive the equation of the parabola given the focus and the directrix. This piece is something that we skipped often, or some people skipped because they were so worried about having them understand what the focus and the directrix was, how can you find it on a graph, but we didn't really derive the equation. And having taught this for numerous years, I will tell you that deriving the equation does help them understand what they really are and why we would care about them, and help them understand how to find where they are and find the measure. So I think you'll be surprised that this actually really helps your students' understanding of parabolas. Also, because we are only doing 2 conics instead of 4, they'll be able to focus on those a little bit more. This plus standard shows you the standard for honors only, And also we have this California standard where when something is given in general form, students should know what shape that is. In Math 3, just circles and parabolas, which is which. And so we were going to work on that a little bit. Okay, so that's just a little peek at the curriculum guide. I'm going to go really fast through the other pages so you can see what you might want to look up. There's a coherence chart that shows you what students have had before, what standards they've learned before this unit. There is some vocabulary that students might need. There is a general planning guide here that tells you the different topics that we would be covering. And there's some resources that you might consider using, you and your PLT might consider using for each of those. There's some additional resources here, and I'll probably be filling this more as the unit goes on. And then when you get to these light purple pinkish sections, that's when you will find some the name of the assessment as you'll find it in Illuminate. You'll find links that you can click that show you practice questions similar to the SBAC questions that you might find on these standards. They'll have example questions, and so these linked spots are places where you could click and see how will my students be tested on this, what kind of question might they be asked. And so that's what goes on there. There's also, oops, wait, I turned 2 pages. The math practice standards for the problem solving parts. You can click on these little numbers and that will take you to some sample problems that they might have to see during the problem solving portion of the test. In the communicating reason portion of the test, you can click on this link and see what kind of clicking on what kind of questions they might be asked in the communicating reason portion. And then if there was modeling and data questions about this, then they would have links there. There's no task models about modeling and data analysis that have to do with these standards. So just wanted to remind you what the what's in the curriculum guide so that you can refer to it. The one part that said day by day, the topic progression, that comes from this page that you can download from the curriculum guide Google Docs, and it has a day-by-day kind of breakdown of things to watch out for, things to worry about. These first couple should be easy, but you are going to need to be teaching completing the square. One thing I did not note here is that completing the square happens in 3.5, section 3.5, originally in your textbook. We're not starting there, we're starting at 3.9. And so in 7.1 you don't need to be able to complete the square. In 7.2, completing the square will be the way we move a circle equation from general form to descriptive form. And so this place will need to be teaching completing the squares. Different sites are looking at different things, so some of them will do all the completing the square on this day. And some of them will do maybe just the start of completing the square in this assignment, potentially picking, besides some of these problems, picking some problems from 3.5 to begin just the idea of completing the square. So that's there. Let me show you what 7.2 would look like, that worksheet would look like. Here it is. It's a half worksheet. Let me see. Cover up. It's a half worksheet, and their kids are just going to be given equations in general form, and they're going to need to complete the square and get it into descriptive form. And then they'll be able to see what the center and radius are and graph it. Actually, they're not asked to graph it, they just need to say the center and the radius. And so, so that's what's going on here. There is a standard about all circles are similar to each other. All circles are similar to each other, and so there's a question here about two circles being congruent. They would have to have equal radii to be congruent, and two circles being similar, one being a dilation of the other, and that's because of that standard. Okay, so that's what's going on in 7.2. Yeah. In 7.3, we begin working from the formal definition of parabola, and there's a video on this, so I'll talk more about that later. This set of notes, I have written a very nice, thorough exploration set of notes. Originally planned it for a block day, but I know that several of the school sites will not have a block next week because of guest speakers. And so there's a couple different things you could do. You could divide that into 2 days, maybe give more completing the square practice on the first night because you might not have finished enough to give the homework on 7.3. I'll talk about a couple ways to shorten those notes up a little bit if you're trying to fit it into one period enough so that they'd be able to do their homework when they get home. So these will be all parabolas that are right side up or upside down, the ones they're already familiar with. Then we'll go to some sideways parabolas. Then we'll talk about parabolas whose vertex is not at 0, 0. Then we'll work on completing the square to move parabolas from general form to vertex or descriptive form, depending on what you call it. And then finally we'll do some kind of a problem using parabolas to model and circles to model a situation. There's a couple different options that are in the folder that you guys can decide which one you would like to use. So that's just kind of an overview of what's going on in this unit. I will tell you that there's also a really nice set of warm-ups called Match My Parabola in Desmos. They're things that students might be able to do on their phone or whatever, and the idea is you project a graph and they have to try to make their phone or their graphing calculator show that same graph. They have to try to figure out what the equation would be. And so that's just a fun game. We could also, I found it after Unit 1, we could have also used it in Unit 1. It could be used in Math 2 when they first learn parabolas. But I'm going to point that out to you because that's something you'd want to use off and on throughout the unit. You wouldn't want to do it all in one day. It's just a bunch of little warm-ups, maybe 5 or 6 little warm-ups about writing equations for parabolas. Okay, so with that general introduction, I wish you the best of luck on this unit and watch whatever other videos you think might be helpful. Thank you.